Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello listeners, and welcome to part 2 of this mini-series on the way international. Here is M. If you were looking to change everything, you go back to the origin story. You go back to the very beginning and you say, oh, actually, I can tell you why this is wrong. And it goes all the way back to the fall of man.
Yeah. And, Victor Paul Werrell set the stage for this with the Christian Family and Sex class, where he's like, bestiality and lesbian sex are paired together in this class really heavily. And he has all this homophobic language, but then Craig Martindale, for whatever reason, has a real intense drive, this real intense homophobia. And whether that's internalized homophobia coming out in a really big way, whether he had a bad experience that nobody knows about, or whether he was just looking for someone to hate, or was truly indoctrinated in these concepts by Victor Paul Werrell and then just took them to an extreme, I don't know. But once he declared that original sin was lesbian sex, things just continued to really devolve and go downhill. He had all these closed meetings with leadership about the infiltration of homosexuals within the organization. There was an attack by the adversary, the devil, and he started outlining steps to combat the problem, which was a lot of mark and avoid. Mark and avoid was their terms, for excommunication. And so when you were mark and avoid, they basically pretend you're dead. So you're mark and avoid, and that's it. Everybody literally turns their back on you. You're totally shunned. And that was his really big solution for homosexuality, was to hunt everybody out and kick them out. So he lost a lot of people during all of this. So we went from 100,000 people to maybe a couple thousand, more like hundreds scattered throughout the world. And during this time, there were lawsuits. So people started stepping up and saying, I was sexually abused or assaulted by Craig Martindale or other members of leadership. And he was actually forced to step down in 2000. And he had been placed on quote unquote probation and stripped of his clergy status at that time, and was dropped out of wake horror. But he basically, he was on probation. He could have technically redeemed himself, but that was it. That was the end of his time with the Way. And a woman named Rosalie Rivenbark succeeded him as the organization's president after that announcement. And she had been on the board of trustees prior to taking the presidency. And because we were mark and avoid by 2000, I don't really have a ton of information about what's happened in the last 20 years. What I can tell you is that the organization still very much exists. They still have these core tenets of speaking in tongues with interpretation, devil spirits and the adversary, a lot of misogyny and patriarchy, homophobia and transphobia. There's an article you can find from 2018 about, I think it's called homosexuality, choice, not genetics. They continue to have beliefs about Jews and other Christians. They don't believe in the Trinity. They're actually not anti-abortion, which is really another thing that goes back to all of this sexual assault and abuse. They say that life doesn't start until the first breath. And so while they don't explicitly state that they're pro-choice, they say that they're pro-truth. And the truth is that abortion's okay because life doesn't start until the child is taking breaths outside of the body of the mother. And so they still hold all of these really kind of intense, crazy beliefs, but it's very polished looking. And their membership is increasing again. They still have WACOR. They still have a form of the WOW ambassadors. They have, international locations. they're sending out ministers all over the world. And the people who are living at headquarters and are the most heavily indoctrinated are certainly victims of systematic abuse. So there's a lot going on, and like that isn't even personal experiences. Those are just like facts about timeline, which is kind of
Oh my
crazy.
goodness. It is. It's like the fall of an empire. They say, what, like empires topple from the top, or empires like that crumble from the top. So this is an example of somebody that loses their grasp on everything, perhaps even reality of some kind. It's unfathomable for me to even begin to consider what a person experiences when their leader gives a talk condemning their existence. So you have LGBTQIA individuals within these communities that are listening to this hate speech, and then what questioning your entire existence, questioning what you did wrong, or why do I feel this way if it's a choice, and my family have these beliefs and ideals as well. It's awful to consider the environments that individuals must have been living in. And I wonder if, well, no, I mean, that's like a whole other episode. But with this particular timeline, you're born in 85. So, oh no, you missed Werewolf's final public speech. But
I
you
did.
mentioned that your first memories of Werewolf were seeing a brass statue of him at
Yep.
the farm at headquarters.
Yeah. He was practically worshipped. So he heavily condemned idolatry. He said Catholicism was just idolatry. Anybody who had, paintings, statues, crucifixion stuff, saints, the Virgin Mary, all of that stuff was seen as idolatry by him. And yet there is a giant bronze statue of him at headquarters. And he's holding open a Bible with like one hand in the air, like preaching in this statue. It's very like lifelike. But we would literally like we went to headquarters a lot. My father was a fellowship leader, and we would visit the freaking statue every time we went. So he basically in the structure of the way, it was all based on the concept of like a tree. And so like the roots are God, the trunk is Victor Werewolf and the organization, the branches refer to like the different areas and jurisdictions, and then twigs were the in-home fellowship groups that made up the branches. And then the leaves were the individual members of the way. So like this is all based on like this tree of life.
That's so funny because for a second I thought you were describing the statue, and I was like, that sounds terrifying.
Well,
the trunk is the body of Victor Werewolf. That sounds so scary.
I mean, there is like a giant tree thing behind the statue. So, he's like intrinsically connected to like the formation of this organization. But, he's very much like a figurehead, but also I think was in a lot of ways worshipped by original membership. Speaking for my parents in particular, my father, he did have a personal relationship with Victor Paul Werewolf, and like I think saw him as like a father figure in a lot of ways. And so was like heavily, heavily indoctrinated. He was in Waycore. He traveled all over the country. He taught Power for Abundant Living classes all under, the guidance of Victor Paul Werewolf. He became a fellowship leader, and he even met my mother while teaching her how to speak in tongues. Like heavily, heavily indoctrinated. Really had this very glowing view of Victor Paul Werewolf. He was pretty infallible as far as my father was concerned. And when he talks about the way, he talks about how, Craig Martindale dragged it down. But I was born in 1985. We weren't totally done with the way till 2000. So he still spent 15 years trying to hang on to these like vestiges of Victor Paul Werewolf and the glory days of the way. So people
Yeah.
were heavily, heavily indoctrinated and attached.
Well, Victor Werewolf basically came forward and said that he was like the born again Messiah. He talked about having this connection to God, or that he was God, and people looking at him must have truly thought he was infallible if this was the belief system that Werewolf was implementing in those earliest days. So then having somebody else come in and change all of those things must have been a really tough adjustment for the early members who were still very committed to the cause.
Yeah, I think it was. And that's where you got things like River Road Fellowship and other splinter groups of like, this is not Victor Paul Werewolf's interpretation of the word anymore. Craig Martindale has taken this down his own path. And therefore, I'm going to go and start my own organization that stays closer to the true word of God. And, all of these splinter organizations still exist. We all know that River Road Fellowship would still exist if those really brave women hadn't come forward about Victor Paul Barnard. That would still absolutely be going on. And while his abuse of women and children was very systematic, there's a lot of sexual abuse in pretty much every splinter organization that is more subtle. There aren't maidens, but
Yeah.
there are a lot of victims.
Mm-hmm. And it speaks to those splinter groups adopting those early belief systems and adopting the methods that were used by Werewolf, who was abusive in nature himself. So if people are saying, oh, we're going to move away and we're going to stay true to the teachings, it's almost like a cycle of abuse, a repeated pattern of behavior. So it's quite scary to consider how many of these groups exist or have existed, and the types of environments that have been cultivated within those systems that we might never hear about. If anybody else listening has an experience like this and can speak to these splinter groups, it would be really powerful to create a network of conversations that draw these things together and allow people to share those parallel experiences. But you're born in 85. Your parents have met within the Way International. What are your early memories of life inside the Way?
They're not great. I'm sure you'll put trigger warnings at the beginning of all of this. I know that you routinely do that, but I just feel the need to like put a heavy trigger warning on the rest of this because my story is pretty intense on a lot of levels, both at my home and within the organization. So there's a lot of physical, sexual, spiritual abuse that I'm going to talk about. I've done a lot of therapy, so I'm pretty okay talking about all this stuff now, but I do sometimes like need a moment, so I appreciate that. So, my first memories are fellowship in my house. We had fellowship in our home 3 days a week that my father led. And so I think my earliest memories, I'm probably about 4. And I was one of the first children in our fellowship. And so there wasn't necessarily originally like a children's fellowship, and I would be part of the adult fellowship. So I had to basically like learn to sit quietly and entertain myself for hours on end while, all of this preaching and speaking in tongues was going on. Within the structure of the Way, we had our in-home fellowships. And then because my dad was a fellowship leader, we would go to monthly branch meetings. So everybody who was a fellowship leader in our area got together once a month with their families, usually in like a rented hall of some kind because there were too many people to be like in someone's home. And then we would routinely go out to headquarters in Ohio for prolonged periods and like stay in a camper. And that included the Rock of Ages. So the Rock of Ages, I spent from birth until the last one in 1994 or five. So I went to like all 10 of them while I was alive. And in all of this, there's sort of immediate indoctrination that women are there to serve men and that bodily autonomy doesn't exist. So, if you read some of the Washington Post articles, it's actually the way is referred to as the kissing cult, because women had to kiss men on the mouth in greeting. And so when I was as young as 4, I was kissing men on the mouth when saying hello. And so that was sort of the first part of grooming is like, this is just normal that you are as a child kissing adult men. And that these adult men and women can, rub your back, pet your hair, kiss you, hold you, and they can also correct you. So if your parents aren't directly present, you're to, treat everybody in your fellowship or at a branch meeting or at the Rock of Ages, any adult can take the role of your parent and punish you if you're not behaving well. So there was just no room to say no. There was no room to develop judgment. There was no room to experiment in the ways I think they're healthy for children to figure out who they are and what's comfortable to them. Touch was just mandatory and punishment was mandatory. It was referred to as the rod of correction. And, during larger group children's fellowship, the adult who was responsible for children's fellowship rotated. So if there was a large group of us children, we would be put in another room with a random adult. Sometimes that adult was, an older teenager. Sometimes they were in their 60s. Some of them were parents, some of them weren't, but they were responsible for keeping us quiet and obedient during children's fellowship. So, a lot of parenting decisions were shared in that way and weren't really questioned. So if somebody spanked you, and they weren't your parent, it wasn't like, oh my God, why'd you spank my child? It was like, oh my God, what'd you do to get the spanking?
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18 plus.
That's impossible. Every person has an idea in their mind of what is right and wrong, what is acceptable and what isn't. And this is just on a societal scale. In this type of self-sealed, enclosed environment, what your parents might not deem punishable, another person might. So how can you expect a group of children with all of these different people taking care of them all of the time to ever understand what their boundaries are, what the expectations are for them and their behavior? I mean, of course, none of these restrictions should be in place for children, and none of this type of behavior around children is appropriate. But did you ever find yourself having to be a different person depending on who was taking care of you? Like, oh, I know that person is not going to punish me for having extra food or playing for 10 minutes longer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the interesting thing about the Way and other groups like it are that I was in the public school system. So I had to be a student that excelled and that basically was attractive to other parents and attractive to other students that were quote unquote worldly. And then within the way, I had to be the very obedient, subservient fellowship leader's daughter. And like, certainly different adults have different expectations. Um, and, you know, I was an eldest child, I was a Spitfire. Um, and, you know, that really got punished out of me at a very early age. So I think probably a turning point for me, I was about 5, and we were at a branch meeting, and my father was introducing us to this man, and I just did not want to kiss him. Like, I just did not want to kiss this particular man. And I said no and embarrassed my father terribly. Um, Ultimately, I was forced to kiss the man. And then when we got home, I was actually spanked with the Bible. And that was like this definitive moment for me of like, wow, I really can't express myself. I can't hold a boundary. I can't say no. And it was really confusing because out in the world, you know, all of these children are exploring boundary setting and saying no and
Yeah.
having bodily autonomy.
It's part of growing up, isn't it? Pushing those boundaries, you know. You need to push your boundaries to recognize where they are so that you can take risks but stay safe. And I imagine in these environments when you grow up being told certain things, taught certain things with certain expectations, that there might not be an understanding of what is right and wrong in wider society. But in public school, the teachers aren't all kissing the students and the pupils on the mouth and touching the kids in a certain way. And I think every person still has that internalized reaction. So you saying you don't want to kiss a particular person on the mouth is probably just your younger instincts of trying to keep yourself safe.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, the unfortunate thing is that I, as self-protecting, a self-protecting child, I really learned to read people and social cues so that I could try to predict my environment and predict what my behavior should be. So, you know, in class and around teachers, I was always, you know, very well behaved. Every parent, every teacher, why can't you be more like Emma? I want my students to be like Emmy. I want my child to be like Emma. Like, that was the whole point. I had really high grades. I excelled in athletics. And I was pretty much taught that I could be present for worldly things, but not participate in them. And so I would make friends who were doing normal kid stuff that I couldn't participate in. And then my parents would meet their parents, they would witness to them, they try to get them to come into fellowship. And I'd either end up with another member of fellowship, or I'd end up with a person being like, whoa, that M person and her family's super weird. Like, so I was the weird kid. I was the kid without physical boundaries. But because most people, most adults don't push boundaries in the way that I was taught was okay, I was relatively safe until I wasn't. So it really also left me kind of vulnerable to ongoing abuse outside of the organization because I was a child that didn't know that I could say, hey, don't touch me. So, you know, it left me open to predation in other areas as well. So I had a lot of conflict. I had a lot of abuse happening. And certainly because of the way I was raised within the cult, I wasn't like, hey, so and so down the street is touching me inappropriately. Like, that wasn't something I could or even knew how to do because in my mind, it wasn't even inappropriate. Um, so the lack of physical boundaries and bodily autonomy, the type of grooming that takes place, is just immediate. Like, there was no like you hit a certain age and then you start to become like sexually indoctrinated. It was just like, here you are. And the homophobia was also like immediate. And when I started to recognize that I wasn't interested in boys in the way that other girls were, and I started to hear all of this intense homophobia, um, I really tried to make up for it. I really tried to push all of that down and be like compulsively heteronormative. And I think as my parents started to recognize those tendencies within myself, those quote unquote like tomboy things, which in one hand were encouraged because again, I was like a very high end athlete, and on the other hand, were discouraged in every other context. They started really talking about. I don't know. I was at Rock of Ages, my dad, and was hanging out with old Waycore friends. One of them had a son, and they were just like, not that there were arranged marriages within the way, but they were like, go play with this boy. You could marry him one day. And I was like 8 or 9 when I was hearing this. So it was just like they were immediately trying to like mask my potential like homosexual tendencies by like pairing me with boys as like playmates and friends. And that continued all through my teen years. I was set up by my father with men up until I was like 17. So it was really difficult to figure myself out and figure out my sexual orientation and not just live in constant terror because not only was I gay and that was wrong and Craig Martindale hated it, but like the source of homosexuality or really anything undesirable was devil spirits and being possessed by devil spirits. And so in my little child mind, I was like, man, I'm having these thoughts about girls. I've got a devil spirit inside of me. And the only way to get rid of that devil spirit is to have it cast out by somebody. But in order to have that happen, I have to tell my dad that the devil spirit exists. And so it was just like this life of like constant masking and hiding, and just not understanding that I could defend myself. Or really, it wasn't even understanding that I could, it was just knowing that I couldn't because it was punished so heavily. And so I was really trapped. And all children within the way are trapped and put into sort of these boxes. But for LGBTQ plus kids in particular, the terror that came along with it, and really being shoved into these boxes in which we didn't technically fit, and just living with this constant looming devil spirit over our head was so stifling and so heavily indoctrinated that even now, as a 37-year-old person, I still have these moments where I'm out in public with my wife and we're like holding hands and I'm just waiting for God to strike me down, or I'm just waiting for people to literally throw stones at us. Like somebody's staring at us and I'm like, okay, this is it. We're going to get attacked. And I can talk myself out of those things with logic and lots of therapy and different coping strategies now. But like, that's
as
how
a child,
yeah,
as a sort of preteen young person, gosh, that sounds absolutely terrifying, but exhausting as well. There's so many things to consider when you're a child in terms of physical development, psychological development. School is really hard and really stressful. And with all these added elements of control and horrible, hateful rhetoric and all of this commitment of just time to the way in terms of the fellowship meetings and the traveling, it sounds absolutely exhausting.
yeah, I think I
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
never got full sleep because I had night terror, vivid night terrors, mostly of devil spirits. And I was constantly in fight or flight mode. But I also had two younger siblings who I was extremely protective of. And I was constantly putting myself in the path of their punishments. And I was constantly, inserting myself to protect them. And so I don't know that I understood true rest for a really long time. And I know that that can't have been good for, emotional or physical development. You need to sleep. Like that's just the reality of things is you need to sleep soundly. You need a certain amount of sleep. You need to be able to sit down and relax and feel your muscles unclench and be able to just enjoy living in moments. And that was really hard because we were just constantly head on a swivel waiting for the next bad thing to happen or waiting for the like devil spirit we had to fend off or waiting to like put on the mask and be like this performative obedient child to impress other adults. It was, yeah, I think I've not really thought about it that way before, and I appreciate you saying that. It was exhausting.
I know that the sleep deprivation and the constant busyness are two counterparts that complement each other in keeping individuals preoccupied and unable to think critically. Of course, when you're somebody born and raised in a group, sets a whole different level of indoctrination in the group, but also, as you've mentioned, like trying to find out who you are, who are you aside from the group. And when you have no pre-identity to return to, it's difficult to begin to look at yourself and say, who am I without these teachings? Who am I without my parents? Who am I without my father's status within the way? Who am I in school when I'm not the obedient child, but I'm observing other children and how they interact with each other and what they talk about doing on weekends and where they go away to summer camp and what their summer camp looks like and sounds like in comparison to your experiences. It's a whole other field of understanding when we look at people born and raised in groups. I feel as though the parameters of expectation and coercion onto your parents were most likely stifling, but applying those same parameters to children is a whole other thing. And you mentioned for a long time being one of the only children in your local fellowship. Was there ever a point of excitement in going away to the Rock of Ages and knowing that there would be other children around for you to interact with and not have to hide this religious side of your life because children in school might not necessarily understand it?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. So the Rock of Ages like was both horrific because it was just like a playground for pedophiles basically, but it was also awesome. They flooded a parking lot and made a water park every year. They had a petting zoo. There was soft serve ice cream. There were pony rides. There were lots of children's fellowships in like these big tents. And at night, after like the main sermon, or sometimes during it, if it was like not child appropriate, we would all be ushered into these children's tents and just like put on mats and like preached at and given coloring books and then eventually like supposed to fall asleep. Like I had like this whole squad of like hundreds of children, and I was just allowed to roam. So like I would just be like running in fields with children I had never met before playing. And no one knew where I was, but that was okay because I was surrounded by family. So it was like this time where you could kind of like experiment a little bit with who you are. You could like interact with children in ways that felt comfortable to you. You could make new friends. I had pen pals that I would like stick to writing with when the Rock of Ages was over. There were cliques, of course, because we were children. And there were a lot of really great, fun, liberating moments in those environments. There's always a juxtaposition in my story of like some things were really good. And I think that's true for like most people in cults, whether you're born in or you enter, there's like a reason that it works. There's a reason people stay. There's positive things that occur. Like there was such a sense of community. Um, and I think that was like a huge component of like this found family. And then you had all this terrible stuff that was happening alongside it. But in some ways, I think they balanced each other out enough that people stayed in and they stayed engaged.
Mm. So you're still excited to go every year with an understanding that there will be abusers and perpetrators most likely amongst those attending, but sleuths of children who are also looking for escapism, I imagine, also looking for connection and community outside of their own local fellowships, which is quite a beautiful thing when you think about it. The kind of reckless wildness of young children all running around together. I imagine like really mucky and muddy and
Oh yeah.
flowers in your hair, and it is important to recognize both sides. And who knows, that those experiences may be some of the things that stay with people enough to keep them going, not inside the group, but just in life. And thinking back on those experiences, those special bonding moments of just rugged children running free through the fields, a flooded parking lot, that sounds awesome.
It was awesome. There were fountains, there were slides. I mean, I think I looked forward to the Rock of Ages until my sisters were old enough to start participating in things like the children's tent and to start drawing more attention from adult men. And then, there are a lot of pictures of me laying behind them and like I'm clearly not sleeping. Like my eyes are under a hat, my siblings like totally asleep, and I'm like physically gripping their shoulder in the pictures because like if somebody's going to approach them or touch them, they have to go through me. Like I'm going to be aware of it. So, and there was like one man who like singled me out in that time frame. And so like the last couple of years we went, like I was not as excited, I was not comfortable. I knew like there was a specific person that was going to be seeking me out, and I also knew that my sisters were vulnerable. And so that changed some of my enjoyment. Like there were still moments of like, I'm on a pony ride, like I'm eating cotton candy till I'm sick. One of my favorite things to do at night after like the big tent, which is where Craig Martindale would typically preach, like we would chase fireflies, like there were again, like all these like really great moments, even among all of the suffering. And I think those moments are what got me through and are the things that I choose now as an adult on their healing journey to like hang on to, because I have to start putting the other stuff down, which is part of the reason that like I'm telling this story finally, as a second generation survivor. Like those stories aren't out there yet, and people are still carrying the burden. Some of the kids I grew up with are still in. Some of the kids I grew up with took their own lives. Some of the kids I grew up with are living these compulsory, maybe that's the word I'm looking for. Compulsory.
Compulsory or compulsive?
Yeah, compulsory, like heterosexual lives with like children and husbands or wives. And I was blessed. I've kind of twisted this for myself, but like I was blessed by being marked in a void. Like it saved my life, even though it was like the worst thing that ever happened at the time. Looking back on it, like one of the reasons I'm alive and happy is because that happened to us. And I'm thankful that it happened because as horrible as the couple of years that followed being marked in a void were, just kind of like floundering in this new existence without the way, it birthed like a beautiful life, and it allowed me to find that like really like spitfire, sassy little girl that just had those things like punished out of her. Like she wasn't actually like gone. She was just like deep down inside under all of the trauma and under all of the indoctrination. And so getting kicked out was a gift, and it's allowed me to be where I am now. But I wouldn't wish my childhood on anyone.
That is the end of part 2 of this mini-series on the way international. To find out more from Em, you can follow the links in the episode description, and to get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault Podcast.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.